The Faerie Queene, Book 5, Canto 1, by Edmund Spenser. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Thomas Copeland.
The fifth book of the Faerie Queene, containing the legend of Artegall, or of Justice. So oft as I with state of present time the image of the antique world compare, when as man's age was in his freshest prime, and the first blossom of fair virtue bare, such odds I find twixt those and these which are, as that through long continuance of his course, meseems the world is quite run out of square from the first point of his appointed source, and being once amiss, grows daily worse and worse. For from the golden age that first was named, it's now at erst become a stony one, and men themselves, the which at first were framed of earthly mould, and formed of flesh and bone, are now transformed into hardest stone, such as behind their backs, so backward bred, were thrown by Pyrrha and Deucalion. And if than those may any worse be read, they into that ere long will be degenerate. Let none then blame me, if in discipline of virtue and of civil uses lore, I do not form them to the common line of present days, which are corrupted sore, but to the antique use which was of yore, when good was only for itself desired, and all men sought their own, and none no more; when justice was not for most meed out hired, but simple truth did reign, and was of all admired. For that which all men then did virtue call, is now called vice, and that which vice was hight, is now hight virtue, and so used of all. Right now is wrong, and wrong that was is right, as all things else in time are changed quite. Ne wonder, for the heaven's revolution is wandered far from where it first was pight, and so do make contrary constitution of all this lower world toward his dissolution. For whoso list into the heavens look, and search the courses of the rolling spheres, shall find that from the point where they first took their setting forth, in these few thousand years, they all are wandered much, that plain appears. For that same golden fleecy ram, which bore Phrixus and Helle from their stepdames' fears, hath now forgot where he was placed of yore, and shouldered hath the bull which fair Europa bore. And eke the bull hath now his bow-bent horn so hardly butted those two twins of Jove, that they have crushed the crab, and quite him borne into the great Nemean lions' grove. So now all range, and do at random rove out of their proper places far away, and all this world with them amiss do move, and all his creatures from their course astray, till they arrive at their last ruinous decay. He is that same great glorious lamp of light, that doth illumine all these lesser fires, in better case, ne keeps his course more right, but is miscarried with the other spheres. For since the term of 1400 years, that learned Ptolemy his height did take, he is declined from that mark of theirs nigh 30 minutes to the southern lake, that makes me fear in time he will us quite forsake. And if to those Egyptian wizards old, which in star read were wont to have best insight, faith may be given, it is by them told, that since the time they first took the sun's height, 4 times his place he shifted hath in sight, and twice hath risen where he now doth west, and wested twice where he ought rise aright. But most is Mars amiss of all the rest, and next to him old Saturn, that was wont be best. For during Saturn's ancient reign, it said that all the world with goodness did abound, all loved virtue, no man was afraid of force, ne fraud in wight was to be found, no war was known, no dreadful trumpet sound, peace universal reigned mongst men and beasts, and all things freely grew out of the ground. Justice sate high adored with solemn feasts, and to all people did divide her dread behests. Most sacred virtue she, of all the rest, resembling God in his imperial might, whose sovereign power is herein most expressed, that both to good and bad he dealeth right, and all his works with justice hath bedight. That power he also doth to princes lend, and makes them like himself in glorious sight, to sit in his own seat, his cause to end, and rule his people right, as he doth recommend. Dread sovereign goddess, that dost highest sit in seat of judgment in the Almighty's stead, and with magnific might and wondrous wit dost to thy people righteous doom areed, that furthest nations fills with awful dread, pardon the boldness of thy basest thrall, that dare discourse of so divine a reed, as thy great justice praised over all, the instrument whereof, lo, hear thy Artegall. Canto 1. Artegall, trained in justice lore, Irene's quest pursued. He doth avenge on Sanglier his lady's blood imbrued. Though virtue then were held in highest price, in those old times of which I do entreat, yet then likewise the wicked seed of vice began to spring, which shortly grew full great, and with their boughs the gentle plants did beat. But evermore some of the virtuous race rose up, inspired with heroic heat, that cropped the branches of the scient base, and with strong hand their fruitful rankness did deface. Such first was Bacchus, that with furious might all the east before untamed did overrun, and wrong repressed, and established right, which lawless men had formerly fordone. There justice first her princely rule begun, next Hercules his like ensample shewed, who all the west with equal conquest won, and monstrous tyrants with his club subdued, the club of justice dread with kingly power endued. And such was he of whom I have to tell, the champion of true justice, Artegall, whom, as ye lately mote remember well, an hard adventure which did then befall, into redoubted peril forth did call, that was to succor a distressed dame, whom a strong tyrant did unjustly thrall, and from the heritage which she did claim, did with strong hand withhold. Grantorto was his name. Wherefore the lady, which Irena hight, did to the fairy queen her way address, to whom complaining her afflicted plight, she her besought of gracious redress. That sovereign queen, that mighty empress, whose glory is to aid all suppliants poor, and of weak princes to be patroness, chose Artegall to right her to restore, for that to her he seemed best skilled in righteous lore. For Artegall in justice was upbrought even from the cradle of his infancy, and all the depth of rightful doom was taught by fair Astrea with great industry, whilst here on earth she lived mortally. For till the world from his perfection fell into all filth and foul iniquity, Astrea here mongst earthly men did dwell, and in the rules of justice them instructed well. Whiles through the world she walked in this sort, upon a day she found this gentle child amongst his peers playing his childish sport, whom seeing fit, and with no crime defiled, she did allure with gifts and speeches mild to wend with her. So thence him far she brought into a cave, from company exiled, in which she nourselled him, till years he wrought, and all the discipline of justice there him taught. There she him taught to weigh both right and wrong in equal balance, with due recompense, and equity to measure out along, according to the line of conscience, when so it needs with rigor to dispense, of all the which, for want there of mankind, she caused him to make experience upon wild beasts, which she in woods did find, with wrongful power oppressing others of their kind. Thus she him trained, and thus she him taught, in all the skill of deeming wrong and right, until the ripeness of man's years he wrought, that even wild beasts did fear his awful sight, and men admired his overruling might. Ne any lived on ground that durst withstand his dreadful hest, much less him match in fight, or bide the horror of his wreakful hand, when so he list in wrath lift up his steely brand. which steely brand, to make him dreaded more, she gave unto him, gotten by her sleight and earnest search, where it was kept in store in Jove's eternal house, unwist of wight, since he himself it used in that great fight against the Titans, that whilom rebelled gainst highest heaven. Chrysaor it was hight, Chrysaor, that all other swords excelled, well proved in that same day, when Jove those giants quelled. For of most perfect metal it was made, tempered with adamant amongst the same, and garnished all with gold upon the blade in goodly wise, whereof it took his name, and was of no less virtue than of fame. For there no substance was so firm and hard, but it would pierce or cleave whereso it came, ne any armour could his dint outward, but wheresoever it did light, it throughly shard. Now when the world with sin gan to abound, Astrea, loathing linger here to space mongst wicked men, in whom no truth she found, returned to heaven, whence she derived her race, where she hath now an everlasting place mongst those 12 signs, which nightly we do see the heavens bright shining baldric to enchase, and is the Virgin, 6th in her degree, and next herself her righteous balance hanging be. But when she parted hence, she left her groom, an iron man, which did on her attend always to execute her steadfast doom, and willed him with Artegall to wend, and do whatever thing he did intend. His name was Talus, made of iron mould, immovable, resistless, without end, who in his hand an iron flail did hold, with which he threshed out falsehood, and did truth unfold. He now went with him in this new inquest, him for to aid, if aid he chanced to need, against that cruel tyrant which oppressed the fair Irena with his foul misdeed, and kept the crown in which she should succeed. And now together on their way they been, when as they saw a squire in squalid weed, lamenting sore his sorrowful sad tine, with many bitter tears shed from his blubbered eyne. To whom as they approached, they espied a sorry sight as ever seen with eye, an headless lady lying him beside, in her own blood all wallowed wofully, that her gay clothes did in discolour dye. Much was he moved at that rueful sight, and flamed with zeal of vengeance inwardly, he asked, who had that dame so foully dight, or whether his own hand, or whether other wight. Ah, woe is me, and well away, quoth he, bursting forth tears, like springs out of a bank, that ever I this dismal day did see. Full far was I from thinking such a prank, yet little loss it were, and mickle thank, if I should grant that I have done the same, that I mote drink the cup whereof she drank, but that I should die guilty of the blame, the which another did, who now is fled with shame. Who was it then, said Artegall, that wrought, and why? Do it declare unto me true. A knight, said he, if knight he may be thought, that did his hands in lady's blood imbrue, and for no cause, but as I shall you shew. This day, as I in solace sate hereby with a fair love, whose loss I now do rue, there came this knight, having in company this luckless lady, which now here doth headless lie. He, whether mine seemed fairer in his eye, or that he waxed weary of his own, would change with me, but I did it deny. So did the ladies both, as may be known. But he, whose spirit was with pride upblown, would not so rest contented with his right, but having from his courser her down thrown, from me reft mine away by lawless might, and on his steed her set, to bear her out of sight. Which when his lady saw, she followed fast, and on him catching hold, gan loud to cry, not so to leave her, nor away to cast, but rather of his hand besought to die. With that his sword he drew all wrathfully, and at one stroke cropped off her head with scorn, in that same place where is it now doth lie. So he my love away with him hath borne, and left me here, both his and mine own love to mourn. A rede, said he, which way then did he make, and by what marks may he be known again? To hope, quoth he, him soon to overtake, that hence so long departed is but vain. But yet he pricked over yonder plain, and as I marked, bore upon his shield, by which it's easy him to know again, a broken sword within a bloody field, expressing well his nature, which the same did wield. No sooner said, but straight he after sent his iron page, who him pursued so light, as that it seemed above the ground he went. For he was swift as swallow in her flight, and strong as lion in his lordly might. It was not long before he overtook Sir Sanglier, so cleped was that knight, whom at the first he guessed by his look, and by the other marks which of his shield he took. He bade him stay, and back with him retire, who, full of scorn to be commanded so, the lady to alight did require, whilst he reformed that uncivil foe, and straight at him with all his force did go, who moved no more therewith than when a rock is lightly stricken with some stonous throw, but to him leaping, lent him such a knock, that on the ground he laid him like a senseless block. But ere he could himself recure again, him in his iron paw he seized had, that when he waked out of his wareless pain, he found himself unwist, so ill bestad, that limb he could not wag. Thence he him lad, bound like a beast appointed to the stall, the sight whereof the lady sore adrad, and feigned to fly for fear of being thrall. But he her quickly stayed, and forced to wend withal. When to the place they came, where Artegall by that same careful squire did then abide, he gently gan him to demand of all that did betwixt him and that squire betide, who with stern countenance and indignant pride did answer, that of all he guiltless stood, and his accuser thereupon defied. For neither he did shed that lady's blood, nor took away his love, but his own proper good. Well did the squire perceive himself too weak to answer his defiance in the field, and rather chose his challenge off to break, than to approve his right with spear and shield, and rather guilty chose himself to yield. But Artegall by signs perceiving plain, that he it was not which that lady killed, but that strange knight, the fairer love to gain, did cast about by sleight the truth thereout to strain, and said, now sure this doubtful cause's right can hardly but by sacrament be tried, or else by ordeal, or by bloody fight, that ill perhaps mote fall to either side. But if ye please that I your cause decide, perhaps I may all further quarrel end, so ye will swear my judgment to abide. Thereto they both did frankly condescend, and to his doom with listful ears did both attend. Sith then, said he, ye both the dead deny, and both the living lady claim your right, let both the dead and living equally divided be betwixt you here in sight, and each of either take his share aright. But look, who does dissent from this my rede, he for a 12 month's day shall in despite bear for his penance that same lady's head, to witness to the world that she by him is dead. Well pleased with that doom was Sanglier, and offered straight the lady to be slain. But that same squire, to whom she was more dear, when as he saw she should be cut in twain, did yield she rather should with him remain alive, than to himself be shared dead. And rather than his love should suffer pain, he chose with shame to bear that lady's head. True love despiseth shame, when life is called in dread. Whom when so willing Artegall perceived, not so, thou squire, he said, but thine I deem the living lady, which from thee he reaved, for worthy thou of her dost rightly seem. And you, Sir Knight, that love so light esteem, as that ye would for little leave the same, take here your own that doth you best beseem, and with it bear the burden of defame, your own dead lady's head, to tell abroad your shame. But Sanglier disdained much his doom, and sternly gan repine at his behest, ne would for aught obey, as did become, to bear that lady's head before his breast, until that Talus had his pride repressed, and forced him Mulgray it up to rear, who when he saw it bootless to resist, he took it up, and thence with him did bear, as rated spaniel takes his burden up for fear. Much did that squire Sir Artegall adore for his great justice, held in high regard, and as his squire him offered evermore to serve, for want of other meet reward, and wend with him on his adventure hard. But he thereto would by no means consent, but leaving him, forth on his journey fared. Ne wight with him, but only Talus went. They two enough t'encounter an whole regiment.
End of Canto 1. Recording by Thomas Copeland.